Looking around, I finally see I think I need a change. The rat race, I wanna flee, my world I'll rearrange. I'm getting back to the roots of how it's meant to be. Growing gardens, picking fruit, racing livestock, living free. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast. I'm your host, Harold Thornborough. Glad you're joining me today. And today I have an interview with Luke Weinhagen. He's the author of the book Primal. It's about using traditional knowledge to face the real world, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at learning primal survival skills for real world application. Now, Luke is he's a certified situational awareness instructor. He's a former United States Marine. He's founder of Core Human Competence, LLC, and the creator of Dangerously Competent, a self-defense and self-sufficiency training program. For over 15 years, Luke has taught individuals, families, and organizations to assess risk, respond swiftly, and win. He is the author, like I said, of the Primal Primer and an applied theory fellow at the Natural Law Institute. I feel like this is a little bit different of a podcast than what we normally do, but I think it's really good, and I think you're really going to gain something from what Luke has to say. And you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with modern homesteading? And we're going to get into that question in this episode. So without further delay, let's just jump right into that interview. Well, Luke, welcome to the Modern Homesteading Podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on and take some time with me today.
Well, I I got to admit, I'm intrigued by the topic today. You've written a book called Primal Primer. Is that right?
Correct. The Primal Primer. Yes.
Okay. And it's about traditional skills, traditional knowledge.
Yeah. So it's the basically it's my contention. It's my articulation of what the skill sets that we've kind of abandoned, but that are required for us to really fully develop into being humans. Okay.
Well, I gotta admit, I'm real anxious to hear how this ties into modern homesteading. I think it does. Sure. I mean, I see some of the applications. Of course, I'm sure you're going to enlighten me on a whole bunch of things I never thought of. As far as foraging and some of the bushcraft skills. Right. I mean, I think they tie right into modern homesteading as far as provision. But I feel like from the questions that you've kind of presented to me that there's maybe more of a mental side of it, more of just the way it kind of makes us think about things. So I'm anxious to hear about that as well. But before we jump into that, how did you get started down this path?
So I got into this stuff intentionally, right? I'm a city kid, right? I grew up in the city, born and raised, whatever. I'm also a child of a broken home, right? So my dad was an addict, an alcoholic, right? We got to see him 1 week in a month, that type of thing. Parents were divorced. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really have a strong male role model in my life. So a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about today, the stuff that I've learned through all this stuff, the stuff I had to go searching for and finding myself because I didn't have it made available to me as a child, right? It just wasn't part of my experience growing up. Then, of course, as I got older, I got married, had kids of my own, and I found myself looking at both my experiences in the world and watching their experiences in the world. And there was just some consistent things missing, right? We're seeing things like anxiety get worse and worse. We're seeing things like depression get worse and worse. My own experiences with depression in high school, my best friend killed himself, right? So I had to walk through that and walk through how the mental health profession tried to engage with us through that process. And it really soured me on they wanted to shut down those emotions and turn off those emotions and medicate our way through that, the mourning process. My response to that was like, how dare you try to take away my mourning from me, right?
Right.
Don't do that to me, right? And so I experienced some of that myself, and then I watched my kids going through and seeing their peers and their friends having the same types of struggles and same types of problems. And so I started trying to figure out what's missing. What are we not doing that we need to be doing? Why? If we think about it, we've never had easier access to resources than we do today. and we've never been safer than we are today. And yet our dysfunction is off the charts.
Right.
We've never been sicker than we are today, right? And why is that?
Yeah.
You know, that's the big question that I started exploring. And so it led me, into various layers of human psychology and human behavior. I've always been a student of human behavior. And so I started digging through things like, all the psychology books and stuff like that. And I came across, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's the one that really jumped out at me as I was doing this digging, this exploration. Is the hierarchy of needs. It's an old concept, but it's formalized by Maslow, and it's that we have to address and take care of those lower level needs before we can progress up into those higher level needs. Right. His goal is human transcendence, right? Where we integrate fully as humans and into our psyche and into our emotions, all that things are fully integrated, right? But it has to start with addressing those bottom level needs, right? The food, the water, the clothing, the shelter, the elimination, the reproduction, the safety, the security, all of those types of things have to be established and in place before we can even think about how do we interact with each other, how do we cooperate, how do we engage, how do we move forward as groups of people, right? We have to have those basic needs met, right? That's kind of where going through, digging into the process, I started looking at the needs and what does it mean because our needs are being met. So why is everybody so broken when our needs are clearly largely being met? Right. And so that got me looking at, okay, what in that dynamic is missing. Right. So we have, Maslow and his cohort and his peers, they explored needs in depth and rigorously. And it's very clear from their research that our needs have to be met in order for us to be healthy organisms, animals, people, humans, right? In order for healthy expression. Right. But we're not healthy, even though our needs are being met. So there's something else going on there. Right. And so that's when I started putting together this idea that maybe it's not enough to just have our needs met. Maybe just like we need to learn how to walk and we need to learn how to talk, we need as humans to learn how to meet those needs ourselves.
Okay. So it's not so much about the result as maybe the process. Getting there, you need to know how to get there. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I got you. Yeah,
exactly. And so that's kind of where my research took me and my digging took me. And so I started exploring that more deeply. And I'm consistently seeing where the mental health problems are manifesting, where the dysfunctions are manifesting, where the social cohesion is breaking down. It's in groups that are getting further and further away from being able to meet those needs themselves. And so that's what I put the theory together. I put the arguments together, and that's what drove me to write the book. That's what got me looking at all this stuff and learning it myself. I was like, I need to be able to pass this stuff on to my kids, right? Yeah. I need to be able to teach this stuff to my kids, which means I have to learn it.
See, I've always thought it was important to learn these things as well, but more for the result than the process, more because I think we need to be able to feed ourselves and we need to be able to do these things, but and having a more end result than the process of it. Right. So I agree with you that I feel like it's really important, but I want to really dig into that. Why you think that is what, makes the bigger difference, learning those things. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So and that's what brought me to writing the Primal Primer. Right. So I started learning all this stuff, and I've done some other things in similar areas, right? Like for a handful of years back in the early 2000s, I ran a strength and conditioning gym, and I ran a powerlifting gym and an Olympic weightlifting. I was an Olympic weightlifting coach and stuff like that. And through that process, I saw, when people would make these changes in their physiological competence, it would have carryover effects into all these other areas of their life. They navigated themselves through the world in a very different way when they learned how to do their first pull-up. That has absolutely nothing to do with any of these other areas of life that they were navigating. And yet it changed, just that increase in competence changed how they were able to move through their everyday life and how they navigated their relationships and things like that, right? And I just use pull-ups as an example, but all of those competencies, as they improved those competencies, increased those competencies, we saw those changes occur, right? And so that had me thinking, maybe we can do that same thing in these other domains, right? So let me lay a little bit of a foundation here for where my framework comes from. All right.
Yeah.
I view technological advance as a mechanism that introduces a gap between our actions and behaviors and nature's feedback for those actions and behaviors, nature's consequences. And I include things such as civilization as one of those technologies, right? But the hut provides a bigger gap than the cave to nature's feedback. The house provides a bigger gap than the hut to nature's feedback, right? We get further and further away from those pressures that nature puts on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are good things. We want these things to happen, right? But as we do that, as we distance ourselves from nature's pressures, we start to lose the impact that those pressures have on us, right? And we've come to realize through some other domains that it's essential in order for us to optimize our genetic expression. It's essential for those pressures to be applied on us, right? Look at I talked a little bit about the fitness stuff. We largely don't have a need to run away from scary animals. We largely don't have a need to climb up onto ledges or over fences or walls.
I've been on some farms where these look like these were necessities when the bull's chasing you.
Right, exactly. we largely don't have a need to lift up giant boulders and throw them at things, right? And yet we are very clear that if we don't get those pressures, our bodies really suffer for it. Our physical bodies really suffer for it. So what do? We create things like gyms and trainers and diet programs and things like that. We introduce proxies for nature's feedback, right? Because we're not getting that feedback directly from nature. We introduce proxies for those pressures.
Yeah, 100 years ago, people didn't talk about dieting. I doubt very much. Yeah.
Right, and they didn't have jogging programs. So they weren't. There was no such thing as a deadlift bar, right? I mean,
right, yeah,
right. They were part of our lived experience, right? They were part of our everyday, how we moved, how we utilized the world. We had to just build those competencies through being human, right? Mm-hmm. And now we see the same thing being true for our cognitive fitness. Right. We don't have nature's pressure anymore. We don't have to be out there hunting all day, every day. We don't have to be doing plant identification all day, every day. We don't have to be, paying attention to, is the neighboring tribe going to attack us all day, every day? We don't have to keep that, our minds working like that all the time.
It probably depends on what neighborhood you live in, but yeah.
Exactly. Right. So we've created proxies for that. We've done a decent job of creating proxies for that. We have puzzles, we have games, we have music, we have language, we have art, we have all these proxies now that provide the pressure that nature would be providing, even though we've distanced ourselves from nature's pressure, right? And that's, I believe the same thing is true for our psychological well-being. We need nature's pressure to optimize the genetic expression of our psychological well-being and what I call our perceptual well-being. Right, which is our ability to observe our environments and read our environments and things like that. And that's one of the reasons I reached out to you. One of the things I love about what you're doing is you've taken the not just the concept of homesteading and permaculture and things like that, right? You're doing this activity that it doesn't just produce the results you're looking for it to produce, but in just the act of doing these things, you've reintroduced nature's pressure into your life. Right. And into the lives of people that you share this with, right? You've reintroduced those pressures onto your system, onto your psychology, onto your ability to be aware of your environment. You're paying more attention to what's going on around you just by by engaging in the practices that you engage in. Right. And so you've even in, I think you're still in a smaller lot, right? You're sub acreage.
Yeah.
Right?
Quarter acre. Yeah.
Right.
Pretty
so
small.
Even though you're living in a very modern home, in a very modern, space, you've introduced a proxy for nature's feedback into that space by adapting and adopting the behaviors that you've adapted and adopted, and you've really integrated the traditional, the natural into the modern technology of the home you're living in the space that you're living in. Right? That's what I'm advocating for. I'm not looking for a regression back to us being cavemen.
Right.
I'm looking for integration. I'm looking for us to find and reintroduce those proxies for nature's pressure onto our mental health and our ability to perceive.
Yeah. In my own situation, I don't know if you know my situation or not, but it was actually a cancer diagnosis that kind of drove me to that point. And it's like, you almost think that in some ways, that fear and that, it kind of set me down that path of having to get into control of, in connection with that, So, yeah, I mean, I think that even if maybe in your own situation, your own life, there were events that kind of led you in a path of seeking that out. So it seems like even if you're trying to get away from that, sometimes life just kind of pushes you back to that.
Right. Well, and that, that's the thing that we neglect, or we try to pretend doesn't exist, right? Nature's feedback is always there, and it's always going to catch up to us. Yeah. Right. We neglect those pressures. We try to avoid them. We try to just stay in ease for too long and too much. We're gonna find dis-ease. Right. We're gonna get there.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of ways, across a lot of different people. Like your own example, right? I mean, your lifestyle produced some pretty significant and pretty terrible feedback.
Yeah.
That you then had to figure out how to navigate. Mm-hmm. And your story of navigating it's inspirational. I mean, it's definitely a warrior's walk there. So I appreciate reading it. But it demonstrates clearly, at least to me, that we can't get away from nature's feedback. We can distance ourselves from it, but if we ever lose touch with it completely, we're going to suffer terrible consequences.
Yeah, I think I agree with all that. Yeah, sounds logical, really. I mean, we're people made to, live a certain way. When we try to get too far away from that, you're right. There's consequences to that, I think. Yeah, right. For sure. Yeah. So would you say all these things are the primal survival skills? I mean, that's what the goal is to get back to those.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with the primal primer specifically, what I was trying to do is distill a set of skills that covered all of those basic needs. Mm-hmm. And so the book, I go over a lot of this in the book. I go over the why, I go over the what, and then with each of the skills that I use in the book, I provide instructions on how to do them, right? And what it represents, and the reason I call it a primer, right? Because it really is just a primer. It's not an exhaustive list of things that you need to master, things like that. It's really just the absolute minimum set of skills required to restore what I call core human competence. Right. And truly the absolute minimum set. And I tried to focus on skills that were applicable no matter what type of environment you're in, right? Because every environment can be so different. But what I wanted to do was create sort of a foundation that people could extrapolate from, right? So that they had this one thing they absolutely knew they could do. And from there, whatever they're confronted with, they have at least that to draw from to navigate the new and unfamiliar that they're being exposed to. Right. And again, this isn't a replace modern technology thing. We have to do this for the same reason we have to work out. We have to do this for the same reason we have to watch what we eat. We have to know these skills for those same reasons, right? Just because we have to have those pressures there. Even if we don't ever need to use them, we have to know how to do them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, in my mind, I'm finding examples. I'm thinking in my own life. Okay. Like I like to deer hunt, for example, but I really don't like to deer hunt with a gun. I like to use a bow. I like to make it harder. I like to, incorporate some skill into it and make it a challenge out of it. And I'm thinking that kind of falls into what you're saying a little bit, that desire to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, we find ourselves drawn to things like that anyways. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's because it's so essential to being human, having these skills. We think that because it's not an instinct, that it's not part of what makes us human, but it's a skill, just like learning how to walk is a skill. It's not something we're born knowing how to do. Learning how to talk is a skill we developed. It's not something we're born learning how to do, right? So just like there's a set of skills that represent our transition from infancy to childhood, what I'm addressing, what I'm talking about here is another set of skills that represents our transition from childhood to adulthood, right? To being that fully mature, fully developed human. Right? And that's what I'm trying to get the awareness of and get us back to with what I'm presenting. So
okay, let's let the cat out of the bag a little bit. What are these primer skills?
Right,
these basic skills that you think are kind of like what we need to be learning.
And I covered them a little bit already. So you have to be able to acquire your own food, right? And that whether the ones I cover in the book are hunting and gathering, but I use fishing and snaring as hunting, right? So it doesn't have to be super extravagant. It doesn't have to. You don't need a ton of equipment. So you have to be able to gather your own food. You have to be able to source your own water, And that includes how to filter it, right? So you have to be able to acquire drinkable, consumable water that's not going to kill you, right? Same thing for the food. You have to be able to create some way of mitigating your environment, things like temperature, right? You have to be able to either produce fire, produce shelter, things like that, some ways to mitigate exposure, right?
Okay.
So I talk about that in the book and methods for doing that. You have to be able to avoid dangerous contact, right? So I talk about that in the book quite a bit. And you have to be able to keep the things you've already acquired secure, so they're not being taken from you, you're not losing them, things like that, right? So it says, for example, one of the things I address early in the book is cordage, right?
Mm-hmm.
I put a little class together in the book on how to make a simple 2-braid weave out of cord, right? Now, cordage isn't an essential need. You don't need cordage. You can't eat cordage. You can't drink cordage. It's not going to keep you warm, things like that, right? But you can use it to help do all of those other things. You can use cordage to make the net for fishing. You can use cordage to make the snares. You can use cordage to make the clothing to keep the elements at bay, right? So there's some things in there that I discussed that aren't directly addressing the needs, but I think that are essential to addressing the needs. Same thing with producing fire, right? I mean, human beings existed for quite a while before they had access to fire, consistent access to fire, right? You can do the gathering of foods and things like that without fire, but fire is a force multiplier for our ability to survive our environments, right? So I go over fire making things in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the purpose of all of these is to reestablish that core human competence, right? I want people to be able to do this stuff, right? This minimum set of skills. But because it's important to know them.
So okay, these skills. I mean, I see where they could possibly have real world application, as far as using these things, doing these things. But even if you never do need to do any of these things, do you think the reason you need to learn how to do these is because it gives you a confidence, or it gives you some? I mean, is there some other kind of a connection here other than that?
Yeah. So confidence is a big one. The biggest one from the research that I've dug into is when you're incapable of meeting your needs yourself, you're dependent on others for the meeting of those needs.
Yeah.
Right. And that's different than reliance, right? Reliance is a choice. Dependence is not a choice. Mm-hmm. Dependence means that if you stop doing it, then you stop existing. Right. I mean, that's what dependence is.
Yeah.
Right. So imagine any organism in the state of they're completely dependent on somebody else to provide their food, to provide their water, to provide their shelter, to keep them safe and secure. Right. Now, when you're in that dependent state, you're also in a state where at any point that can be withdrawn from you because you aren't capable of doing it yourself. Right. And so that creates this low grade, and different people are going to be more or less sensitive to it, but it's this low grade, continuous state of anxiety that you're in when you're in that dependent state. Right. And so we're reaching adulthood, what we're calling adulthood, in that state of continuous anxiety, in that state of dependence, incapable of provisioning our own basic needs. And we're the first complex animal on the planet that's ever done that. Every other complex animal that's ever existed on the planet can provision its own needs, learns how to provision its own needs, or it has the instincts to provision its own needs.
Say the human could up till just probably a few decades ago.
It's a very recent phenomenon, and that's why we need a primer to start getting back into it.
Yeah.
Right? I think as technology has advanced and improved over the course of human history, we've gotten a little bit further away from it, but it was still part of how we got through the day. Every day we used all these skills on a regular basis, right? But then when we got to the Industrial Revolution, we really started to lose our connection with our environments and our ability to navigate those environments as an organism that's part of that environment, right? And it didn't happen all at once. And we had periods where we had to go back to it. You look at things like the Great Depression; it forced us to go back into using a lot of these skills and stuff like that. So it wasn't just a steady distancing away from it. It wasn't a steady abandonment, but definitely in the last 2-3 generations, we've almost completely, with the exception of outliers, people that are still hunting and things like that, people like you that are doing permaculture and stuff like that, with the exception of the outliers, as a society, we've abandoned our connection to these skills altogether.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing the effect of that abandonment across society.
It seems like a lot of people would argue the fact that the modern conveniences and the modern technology would actually relieve a lot of anxiety and depression.
Right.
I mean, you're actually arguing the opposite, saying that it's the cause of it.
I'm arguing the opposite. Yeah. And let me throw another thing at you here. And this is a big one. This is one that I kind of have to lay the foundation through the book in order for this to even come across to people, right? If you can't say no, I talked about dependence, right? If you can't say no, cooperation is impossible. Cooperation has to be a choice or it doesn't exist. So think about where people are dependent right now in our society. That once you start to look at that, you start to realize how little we're actually cooperating these days.
Yeah, I agree with you.
We're in a state of constant dependence. When you're that dependent party, you have to keep the people and the systems that you're dependent upon amenable to continue providing for those needs. You have to keep them happy enough to keep providing for those needs, right? So you have to comply. You have to go along with them. You have to stay in line, right? And no matter how anybody feels about the last couple of years, it was a stark wake up call about what that means, what the type of pressures that we can face when we're in that position, we're in that compromised position.
So,
right?
You would even say that maybe the threat of that going away, if you don't comply or don't compromise, could actually cause a lot of anxiety and depression. Just knowing that could happen at any point. It
is causing that anxiety and depression. Yeah, you look at animals in captivity. You go to the zoos and stuff like that, right? You see the same things happening with them, right? Mm-hmm. If they're in the cage, they start to manifest all the same behaviors we see in humans. They start to manifest the anxiety. They start to manifest the depression. They start to manifest the inappropriate panic and inappropriate aggression. Right? They start to manifest all of these things. And over time, the zoos and stuff like that, they've learned this. And then what have they done? They've started to try to mirror the animal's normal environment more and more in their enclosures and try to get the animals close to living in their normal environment as they can. Right? We've put ourselves through, as humans, we've put ourselves through basically a process of domestication, right? As we've gotten further and further away from nature, right? And so what we need to do, and what I'm advocating for, what I'm arguing for, is we need to reintroduce these ways of getting our habitat to look more like our nature. Like we need those pressures. We need to have the experience of
been my goal.
Pressures. Right. Exactly. And you're the walking embodiment of the positive effects of that. Right. I mean, the closer we get to that, and again, I like modern medicine.
Yeah.
I like electricity.
Well, right? I like being able to do a Zoom call like we're doing now.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, I could never have this conversation with you and do this podcast and make these connections worldwide if we didn't have technology. So I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm not down on technology at all. I'm a huge proponent of technology, but I do believe and I do argue that we have to have these proxies in place for nature's feedback that we've abandoned and gotten ourselves away from. And that's my goal with all of this, is to reintroduce those.
So. You say all this and I can't find anything. I'm going, oh no, you're wrong about that. And I'm thinking, it's something I feel like a lot of us just, we know inside,
right.
But you've put it in words in a book, and that's helpful, and I think that that's valuable for sure. Yeah.
One thing, think about, we've all been late on an assignment, right? You've been late on a homework assignment or a work assignment or something like that. And your brain, when you're in that position, your brain starts to signal you. It starts to make you feel bad about that procrastination, right? It starts to worry at you. Right. It's just part of how our brain structure works. Right. That's part of the emotional response to the feedback that we're getting from our environment. And all I'm suggesting is that same thing is happening to us with all of our needs, not just those, rare occurrences where we're behind on something or we're due. It's just that is right now that's part of how most of us are navigating the world. It's with that constant low grade drip of anxiety ever present. And man, just thinking about that, of course our relationships are going to suffer for that. Of course, our ability to communicate effectively with people that differ from us is going to suffer. We're going to be walking around scared of everything.
Just hearing you say it's making me anxious. I don't know.
It's the opposite of my goal.
Oh, I get it. So let me just kind of back up here a second. So I know that it ain't this simple and this straightforward, but I'll let you go. I'll let you go from this.
Yeah.
So if I start making some cords and I start filtering my water and I start hunting and trapping, my anxiety and my depression is going to go away.
Yeah, it's gonna help. It's gonna help. So it's not going to cure all, right? We've introduced a lot of dysfunctions into our environments and into our experiences, right? So there's a lot broken right now, and this isn't going to fix everything, but it is going to create a foundation that allows us to address all the other things that we've introduced that aren't working well, right? And that's really the big thing here is I just want to restore a foundation for people to do this integration of technology to do this. In my view and my perspective, most of the stuff we should probably have learned by the time we're about 12 years old.
Yeah.
This doesn't take away from our ability to specialize into our careers or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
This is truly fundamental, rudimentary human competence.
I'll tell you, I'm thankful. You're talking about this stuff and I'm going, man, I'm thankful. I grew up in a home where we actually did things like that. My dad took us out. Yeah. We hunted and fished and trapped and, we foraged for mushrooms and did all the things, and now I look back on that and I go, yeah, I'm glad I know those things, even though I don't use them to provide for myself, maybe in a huge way. I do a little bit, but there was years where I didn't, and I did it more for just because I liked it, it was part of who I was,
Right. But that because you have that skill set already, nobody, nothing outside of system can come to you and say, do what we tell you, or we're going to take away your ability to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they ever say that to you, you can still say no. And no is the most important word in cooperation. It's not yet. We associate cooperation with the word yes, with the affirmative. Right. But no is actually the most important word in cooperation because it can't exist without the option to say, no, I won't cooperate.
Right.
So you having those skill sets means that you're always in a better position to cooperate than people that don't have those skills.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I like cooperation. I value it. I want my kids to grow up in a world where we're cooperating with each other, not compelling each other or coercing each other or manipulating each other. So
you probably talk about this in your book, I'm sure, but what I do these things, what does it give me? It gives me confidence. We nailed that one. Self-esteem. Maybe it takes away fear because now I'm not dependent on saying yes to you. I mean, are these? Am I going down the right path here?
Yeah, you're going down the right path. One of the other big things that I cover in the book, my day job, I'm a certified situational awareness instructor. Right, so I teach organizations, public-facing organizations, situational awareness and behavioral analysis. Right. So they could get out ahead of bad things happening. Yeah. Right. And that's one of the big things that I cover in the book is this idea, this concept of situational awareness, because it's the start point of all of our decision making is the ability to observe. Right. Are you familiar with Colonel Boyd's OODA loop concept?
No.
The observe, orient, decide, act.
Right? That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Right. It's Colonel Boyd. He was an Air Force colonel. He came up with it as a decision making process, right? And it's useful outside of the military as well. It's been applied to.
Yeah, I think a lot of workplaces teach that as like
they teach the same thing. The very first step in that is observe, right? Mm-hmm. So in order to even get to quality actions, you have to have quality observations. Right. And so that's why I spend a lot of time on situational awareness, because as you're moving through your environment, you want to be able to look at everything around you and identify the resources, both, from the standpoint of getting your needs met. Right. And you want to be able to identify the threats in order to determine the safety of that environment, how you're going to respond to that environment. Right. So it's hugely that observation piece is hugely important. And to get back to your question about, what this provides for you, in addition to, alleviating that low grade anxiety, in addition to this being an absolutely essential requirement for maintaining the opportunity for cooperation, this turns you into someone that is in control of your environment rather than your environment controlling you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you put all of the pieces together, it means you are the one navigating your environment. You don't ever have to wait for the world to be safe, because you can safely navigate the unsafe.
Yeah. Again, I feel like these are things that are just part of me, whether I would ever verbalize them or not. I go in, if I sit in a restaurant, I don't sit with my back to the door.
Right.
I sit in a position where I can see people and see things. And, these are just the basics of it. But yeah, it's just, I think little things that we do, that we're trying to control the situation around us, and make sure we got an eye on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that's, kind of what I'm getting at, is that these are very basic human skills.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them come to us naturally, just like the desire to walk comes naturally. But imagine if we were denied the opportunity to learn to walk. If every time you stood up to try to figure out your balance and take that first step, somebody pushed you down.
Yeah.
Right. That'd be terrible. That'd be a significant blow to how you develop as a human being, and it'd be a significant blow to how you can move through the world. Right. This abandonment via technology and things like that I've talked about here, that's somebody pushing us down every time we try to learn how to do the things I articulate in the Primal Primer. Right. Mm-hmm. We're just not even being presented with the option to learn these things anymore. So it's from that standpoint, people that don't have your childhood where some of these things were made available to you, people that grew up like I did, where this stuff just wasn't even an option, right? I couldn't go in the backyard and make my own fire, right? It's just not something that I could have done, right? So, but that was effectively, our whole society being arranged in a way that pushes us down every time we try to learn those things, right? Yeah. So it's a lot of stuff. I don't blame anybody for it, right? It makes sense if you look at how we got here, but we have to find a way to reintroduce some of these things back in.
Yeah,
otherwise we're going to keep falling apart. So.
What's coming to my mind is, like, so many people groups. Throughout history, there's been a lot of people groups that, there would be this training from a young child, especially with the men, and I'm not going to try leave out the women because I don't know what they were doing, but I know with the men, a lot of times the boys would be raised up learning these skills. And then there would be this time in their life where they came to this rite of passage thing where they would have to perform in a certain way to be called a man, and go out and, hunt a certain animal or do survive in the woods for 3 days or something, that would enter them into manhood. And I don't know that was always right, but you see that it was a major development in their life to become a fully, functional person in that people group,
Yeah. You couldn't become an adult member of that group until you demonstrated the competence of the adult member of that group. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here with this, the concept I call core human competence is this minimum set of required skills it takes to be a fully mature, fully developed human.
Now we got kids that grow up and can't, balance of checking,
right. Or use a can opener.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I'm kind of laughing in jest, but it's sad. It really is sad, but we need to, we need to raise our children to be able to function in this world. But I see what you're saying, not just function in a world full of technology and conveniences, but to feel good that they don't need those things if they didn't have them. Yeah.
Well, and I want the grocery store to be a choice.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to take the grocery store away. I want the grocery store to be a choice. My goal with all of this stuff, I'm not looking to get everybody out in the woods all weekend long hunting for their next meal. What I want to do is make sure that we don't ever end up in the streets killing each other for our next meal. Sure. And I want to preserve cooperation. And that's my whole goal. Is just we're not cooperating, but it's because we can't. We can't cooperate because we can't say no, because we have to have our needs. That's why they're called needs.
Yeah.
We have to have our needs met. And right now we're dependent on others for them, which means we can't say no to that system that's providing the needs. But if we can get to a point where each of us is competent and confident enough in our ability to meet our own needs, then suddenly we're cooperating again. Then we're exchanging value rather than manipulations.
they're not controlling your food because you can get your food outside of the system. Yeah.
Right.
You're not controlled. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Be uncontrollable. That's my goal here.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, and I agree, you know, and it's not even just the food overall. It's what kind of food, you know, you're going to eat the food from the grocery store. You're going to eat this, what I consider almost poison these days. You know, we're going to feed you this and you're going to eat it because that's what's available to you. And we can say no and go down a different path, you know, and choose to grow our own food, raise our own animals, forage, hunt, do all the things. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been pushing for a long time. It's what I talk a lot about on this podcast is that, you know, we need to be able to do things for ourselves. I mean, I use the word self-sufficiency a lot but you know, when I say that, I don't ever mean you're doing it all by yourself. We operate in a community of people, but you know, and that's good that we can rely on others as well. And we can be there for others also. But, yeah, I mean, we definitely, even on the individual level, there has to be a level of competency in these things so you can do them. Yeah. And feel good about it. So, yeah. So what's the skills what is there one skill you say, learn this one for sure?
Yeah. So the one skill that I think is most important right now is that skill of situational awareness. And what it is, it's, the way I present it, you have to do what I call establishing a baseline, right? And that means learning how to step into any environment and figuring out what fits and what doesn't fit in that environment, right? What's supposed to be occurring in that environment? What behaviors would you expect to see in that environment? What makes sense to be in that environment? That's what I call establishing a baseline, right? Once we've established a baseline, and the whole reason we want to establish a baseline is so that we can identify anomalies, any deviations from that baseline, right? So an anomaly can be something that is in that environment that shouldn't be in that environment, or an anomaly could be something that's missing from that environment that should be in that environment. So like the example I use in the book is, let's say you walk into a coffee shop, right? We all know, we've all been into a coffee shop. We know what to expect in a coffee shop. You know, you see people waiting in line to get coffee, waiting in line to pick up their order. See people at tables on laptops, you know, see people in conversations. You see the staff back there, you know, making all the frothy drinks, all that kind of stuff.
Names on the cups.
Names on the cups, all that stuff that we expect to see. And we can reasonably expect that same baseline to exist in just about any coffee shop we walk into anywhere in the world, right? It's a pretty familiar baseline, pretty easy baseline to set, right? Now, what if you walk in to that coffee shop and there's a person in a clown suit behind the counter, right? That would be a deviation from our expectations. That would be a deviation from our norm, a deviation from the baseline. So then we have to start thinking, all right, is there context that makes this appropriate? Is it Halloween? Are they doing some sort of celebration? Right? Is there any context that makes this appropriate? Right. So we evaluate our anomalies through context.
He's a politician. He's a politician.
Well, they're all clowns. So, you know.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
You don't even need the suit. So we filter our anomalies through context and relevance in order to figure out whether or not they actually are anomalies or we need to fit them into our baseline. Right. But we do that. So we establish a baseline. We learn to establish a baseline so that we can identify anomalies, and we do that so that we can make a decision. And that's what situational awareness is actually about. It's about making decisions based on the inputs from your environment. And we want to get to a point where we can make a decision as quickly as possible, right? So that's an example of something being added to the environment that's a deviation from a baseline. Let's say you walk into that same coffee shop, there's nobody at the counter. You don't see any employees anywhere, right? You're looking over the counter, you can't see anybody anywhere, right? That's also an anomaly. That represents a deviation, but that's a deviation where something was subtracted from our environment. Right now, it could be they're all in back at gunpoint. You don't know. It could be there was a bomb threat on the building and everybody got out and you showed up afterwards and shouldn't be there. But there's something that's in that environment that's telling you that there's something not right, that there's something that doesn't match or align with your expectations. We've kind of been conditioned to ignore those kind of signals. You know, we get feedback from schools and from society, so that, you know, treat everybody equally, and you know, don't judge, and don't do, you know, don't make you know, assumptions about people and things like that. We've lost a lot of our ability to be situationally aware because of that. I understand the intent of that feedback, but we've really we've really crippled or hindered ourselves to accurately read our environments by applying some of those concepts. And so I'm also trying to reintroduce that the big skill, the most important one, is the situational awareness, because it's that first step in our decision making process.
I think
we have to have those quality inputs. Right?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I even see that skill. You're putting in scenarios in a place. You walk in and see something, but I'm even thinking about just stepping out of yourself, kind of, and just doing like this, broad observation of your life and say, okay, is there sicknesses in my life? Or there financial situations in my life that ain't right? Just look at all the things that are wrong or maybe not where they should be and say, okay, what's causing that? Right. And really be aware of your situation, and then start thinking about what are the steps it would take to fix that. Yeah. And I see that being situational awareness, right? Even to using that kind of a situation for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree with you. And that's one of the concepts I try to help people get in the book, is when I'm talking about situational awareness, I'm not just talking about those kinetic events, those sudden occurrences, right? Those definitely are something we want to be situationally aware of. But the whole point here is to buy us as much time as we can for our decision-making process, right? So in those kinetic events, we might be buying ourselves seconds in order to make a decision, right? The bad actor, the attack, things like that, things that we're paying attention to.
Right.
We might be buying ourselves seconds. But, like in the examples you used, we could potentially be buying ourselves years.
Yeah.
Ahead of the bad thing happening, if we're paying attention to it. Like another one of the examples I use in the book, I mentioned earlier that I had that friend of mine kill himself in high school. If I had a bigger, broader, stronger skill set of situational awareness, I could have picked up signals he was giving off, or the adults in our lives could have picked up signals he was giving off. Nobody was paying attention to those. Nobody had the skill of situational awareness to pick up on the changes in his behavior, the changes in his demeanor, the changes in his expression, and things like that, to do any intervention, or it wouldn't have occurred, right? I would be able to use that as an example, right? And so, so even so, in this, it didn't happen. So, I mean, obviously the death happened suddenly, but leading up to the death, there was a fair bit of time where, looking back, you can see things that were missed in the process, right? So, absolutely, you're absolutely correct in that this skill set doesn't just apply to immediate threats or immediate environment. It is a broad, lifelong skill set that it's just not being developed anymore.
Yeah, I would say most disasters, either on a large scale or even in your own individual life, that happen are probably from a breakdown of that awareness. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, sure. We evolved to read tiny, subtle cues in our environments. Right? I mean, that's what our senses are doing all the time. Our sight, our hearing, our smell, all of that. It's picking it even more than what we're consciously aware of. It's reading all of these signals all the time. We call that process our intuition. We call that, our gut, right? That's picking up on all these signals, and we get a feeling about a place or a feeling about an individual or things like that, right? But we're actually picking up on real legitimate cues. We're picking up on their expressions. We're picking up on body language. We're picking up on how they're navigating through the environment. I mean, the research shows body language is something between 60 and 70% of communication. How much time in school did you spend on body language? I got none.
Yeah, not that I recall. I'm self-taught, but
and it's 60 to 70% of our communication. Yeah. We're leaving huge gaps in our ability to interact with each other. Because we're ignoring and we've abandoned these skill sets. Yeah. Right. So I don't know. It's just astounding to me as I've dug deeper and deeper into this, and I've gotten more and more into it. The more I learn about it, the less I feel like I know, because it gets so deep so fast. But it's just such an essential. That one particularly, I think, if I had to pull out one skill set, it would be that develop situational awareness, because it applies so broad.
That sounds like a great place to start. Also, I think a great place to start is with your book. It sounds like it's lays out the basics right there. I mean, you get really, a beginner, a place to begin. I mean, now where do you go from there? I mean, you probably have ideas on what you do after you read a book like yours. I mean, what are the next step and the next step and the next step? But there's a beginning point.
The book, it's pretty straightforward. It's a quick read. It's not a real long book. Right. My goal is to make it as accessible as possible. And the other nice thing about it is I use myself as the example, so I'm not beating you up through the book, right? So you get to
sounds like we could all be an example.
Right. Which is So like I mentioned earlier, the book represents the absolute minimum set of skills. From there, I offer courses and training and stuff like that as well. That's what my business is. So I'm always available as a resource. But what the book is a general approach. It's a general set of skills. From there, really start looking at what is in your environment. Pick up a book about or even an app, a plant identification app, right? And go wandering through your parks or your trails or whatnot, and start looking for what are the plants around here that I can utilize to get fibrous material to make cord? What are the plants I can use around here to make a fireboard with? What are the plants around here I can eat?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
As you're moving through, even through your public parks in the middle of a city, a lot of the stuff you're looking at is resources.
Yep.
That should you need to use it, it's there and available to you. So stuff like that you can do. It's not on a regular basis without any change in your normal routine.
And you know what? And again, today's technology can absolutely assist you in learning these primal skills.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend of mine, and I don't know if you remember a few years ago, if you came across your radar at all, but there was this big craze where people were playing that Pokemon Go game, right? They're wandering around with their phone.
I remember that. Yeah.
Little virtual creatures. I'm like, do that same thing, but use a plant identification app and go find every edible plant you can.
Great idea.
3 mile radius of your house. It's the same concept. Gamify your education. Exactly. Right. Have some fun with it. But after you get through the primal primer, look local. Right. What's in your environment? What's going to be the best type of shelter to build in your environment? What's going to be the best? What kind of animals exist in your environment? Right. What's the best way to, if you had to, how do you trap or catch or hunt those animals, right? In your environment, what are some of the threats that exist? What can you start looking for locally that's specific to your experience, right? So mine is the general. So build the foundation of the general, and then start drilling down into the more local, more specific, more directly applicable to your experience, and then just build what I call file folders, right? It's just experiences. Try to build as many file folders as you can. Draw from mine, draw from other people that are subject matter experts, and then draw from your own. You have as many of these file folders in your head for any experience you might encounter, so that you can extrapolate, and connect the dots and pull from and navigate those environments, right? I mean, the goal here is the human being. We got to where we are because we are the top adaptive generalist that's ever existed on the planet, right? And we've through our specialization and through our division of labor and stuff, we've overcommitted ourselves to those things, and we've really stepped away from that generalist expression. And what I'm suggesting here is that all of us need to reestablish that foundation of being an adaptive generalist. And that's the goal here. So once you've got once you've got my foundation in place, then start adopting and adapting that to your specific needs and your specific environment, and really build from there. Yeah. And then have fun with it, right? Do this with your kids. Yeah. My kids all learn this stuff from me. I've got a 6-year-old, and she loves helping me make the fire. Right. That's a skill she's never going to forget. Yeah. Make it fun. No sense having anxiety, trying to lose anxiety. Yeah. Right. So, I mentioned my kids. One of the other things, I don't know if you have kids or not, but grandkids. We often, when we're out and about, we'll play, like the I Spy game. Right. But I incorporate situational awareness training into that. I'll use the examples I'm seeing in the environment, and I'll say, I spy the clown behind the counter. Or, I spy something that doesn't make sense in this environment. I want them looking around for it, try to identify, right? So this stuff doesn't have to be hard to learn, and it can be fun to play with as you're doing it. All of that is practice, and all this stuff, just like learning to walk takes practice, all of this takes practice. And first it's going to be awkward and clumsy, and you're going to feel like you're wrong all the time, right? But it doesn't matter. Keep practicing, keep paying attention, keep looking at your environment, right? Just make sure that, if you have any concerns about, as you're doing your plant exploration, if you have any concerns about whether or not it's edible, don't eat it. I'm with you there. Yeah. 110% sure that it's edible before you put it in your mouth. Absolutely. I do. In the book, I do present the Army's version of their plant edibility test.
Mhm.
right? So they have a whole process you can go through to test whether or not a plant is edible. And I put that in the book as well, so people have a mechanism for doing that part as well if they find
Awesome.
the need to.
Yeah. Well, Luke, you've definitely given us, well, I mean, you've given us a lot to think about, and you gave us some first steps to take for sure. I mean, I recommend people get your book. I'm going to get it. I don't have it right now, but you've convinced me that I want to read this because it sounds like it's covering all the basic stuff, but I mean, sometimes you just have to get back to basics and really understand why you're doing the things you're doing. Take it to a deeper place and it give you, the confidence to really understand I need to do this, and plug yourself, the book, the website, all the things. Tell people about yourself.
Yeah. It's like you say, no matter where we go, no matter what we do, we don't ever get to stop being human.
Mm-hmm.
That's just baked into our experience. Right. So the book is the Primal Primer, right? This is the book here.
Survive. What's the subtitle there?
Survive anything, slay anxiety, and exit the system.
I like the exit the system part a lot.
I don't want you dependent on the system. I want you to be able to cooperate. My website is corehumancompetence.com. That's where I offer my organizational training and where I'm developing online courses for all this material as well. The book's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes & Noble's website. You get soft cover, hard copy, all that kind of thing. There's links on the website as well. I do offer there's the paperback, the hard copy, there's audiobook, and there's video book for this one. If you want me reading it to you,
we'll put in all the links for sure.
Well, yeah. And I'll shoot those all over to you. I'm also on Twitter at LukeWeinhagen.com, right? Is my Twitter handle. But really the website's the best place to find me. All my links are there. So
great stuff. Yeah. I tell you, I didn't know what to expect with this because it's not our normal, not our normal discussion, on a homesteading podcast, but I tell you, I think it fits right in. I think, everything you said is exactly what we need to be doing. And, like you said, we may never be as a people in a position where we have to be out, breaking completely away from the system because we said no and we have to feed ourselves. We may never be in that situation.
Right. And I hope we aren't.
I hope we aren't. But it's nice to know that if we ever are, we can do it. And
my argument is that it's essential to know.
And even if you never have to use it, it does something for us beyond just the provision itself.
Yep.
So
it's the weightlifting for our emotions.
That's great. I love it, man. It's good stuff. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all this with us. I think it's something a lot of us need to hear.
Absolutely. And, I just want to extend my appreciation to you as well, because even though it may not have been on your radar, you've been helping people's mental health through the stuff you've made available as well. So I
appreciate you saying that. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, some great stuff from Luke there. I hope you'll get his book. I did. As soon as we got done with that interview, I went and bought I actually bought the Kindle version, and I dove into it a little bit, and it was some good stuff in there. And I look forward to getting through the book. I think it's a good place to go and get some of this information and get started with all the things that Luke talked about. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until the next one, happy homesteading and God bless.
Looking around, I finally see I think I need a change. The rat race, I wanna flee. My world, I'll rearrange. I'm getting back to the roots of how it's meant to be. Growing gardens, picking fruit, racing livestock, living free. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead. A lot of folks don't understand why I wanna live this way. They've never eaten from their land like we do here every day. Snapping beans like Grandma did, sitting on her front porch. Hunting and fishing like a kid once you've done all of your chores. It's a modern homestead. Build a modern homestead. Country or city, there's a way to make this change. You gotta start today.